Hello, welcome to the Just in Time Cafe. I am Elizabeth Swan, co-founder of the Just in Time Cafe, and I'll be your moderator today. If you've never been to the cafe before, welcome. We are psyched to have you. Now that you have registered for one of our webinars, you're going to get on our mailing list, which means you will hear about other phenomenal webinars with great people like Rebecca, and podcasts and other fun free stuff. So welcome. And let me tell you a little bit about today's webinar, Building Teams, Be Intentional and Get Better Results. A little bit about Rebecca. She's the owner of RS Consulting. She coaches people, teams, and organizations on leadership and lean transformation with an emphasis on advancing culture. She is active in the design and construction industry, speaking at various industry events. Across the US and abroad, Rebecca also serves on the board of directors for the Lean Construction Institute, that's LCI, and the Center for Innovation and in the Design and Construction Industry, that's CIDCI. You know how I love acronyms. I am so excited to have you, Rebecca. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here.
Okay. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. Rebecca is going to entice you with some polls, so please engage in the polls. She will also be asking you for some interaction in chat, so be generous in your participation. And also, we want to know where you're from. So if you wouldn't mind putting into the chat area right now, where did you sign in from? Is it early? Is it late for you? So where are you in the universe? We always like to see where folks are from who are joining us. And I can see, let's see, participants. Here we go. Oh, I see some names we recognize, right? I see Carlos Vallejo, cool.
Hi, Carlos.
and who else? Amy Dunn. We know Amy Dunn, don't we? Rebecca from Denver. Let's see. I am from, let's say Elizabeth. Let's see. I am from Cape Cod. That is where I am from. Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where it's really, really hot today. Let's see.
I see Heather Hernandez from UCSD, Katie from UCSB. I got a lot of.
The chat feature is disabled.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's strange.
That is very strange. That is also really unfortunate. How do we make sure?
There's Q&A.
Q&A is working.
Section. Yeah, Q&A is working.
Wow, the latest update of Zoom must have disabled our chat. Evil Zoom.
That's okay. We are going to react on the fly and move to the Q&A.
This interesting. This happened to me yesterday on a webinar with APQC, and I thought it was them. And I think this just became a new thing on.
These are exercises in flexibility. Zoom does it, as for fun to try to build more skills.
Yeah.
So put in the Q&A where you're from.
Yeah. No, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing a few folks. Heather from San Diego. Welcome, Heather. She says hi to you, Tracy.
Hi, Heather.
Olga, welcome, Olga, a future webinar host.
Yes.
Olga from Redwood. We've got Jake from Vancouver. Another Olga from Portland. Welcome. And Samantha from Laramie. Welcome, guys, and thank you for flexing with us. I don't even seem to be able to change my chat.
That's okay.
All right, so I'm gonna let that go. I'm just gonna let that go. All right, so I'm letting it go. All right, so let me do
song right now, but you don't want to hear me
I
sing.
don't want, I
Let
don't
it
want to, no
go.
one wants
Okay,
to hear
fine.
either of us sing. All right, so let me give you some other cool stuff. Coming up, Tracy, tell us about our next webinar.
All right, so guess what? Our next webinar is a bunch of these people who are going to be presenting. This is the continuous improvement arm for the city and county of Denver, the Denver Peak Academy. They inspire and empower city staff at all levels to continuously improve service delivery for the community. Guess what? They have been around for 10 years. It's their 10-year anniversary. And the Peak has helped city staff save over $50 million and in soft savings and 8.8 million in savings to customers. So what did they do that was super interesting besides that? They did a strategic planning refresh on their vision, mission, goals, metrics, and their 18-month roadmap. And they completed that this year. And I was the facilitator. So I asked them if they wanted to come and talk to our community about their strategic planning elements that they inputted for transformation, the method and the schedule of how they worked on these strategic planning elements. Because guess what? They did it all virtually. And gone are the days of a 4-day strategic planning retreat. They did it in a virtual environment with a facilitator over a period of 12 weeks. And you guys get to see the end product in Mural. And so that is going to be next month on Thursday, August 25th at 11 a.m. And as we all know, everybody should be doing a refresh on some of their strategic planning elements, especially, the annual ones.
Oh, yeah.
So can't wait for next month's webinar.
And you'll get that link or the invite in an email. So look out for that. And then the other thing is, if you have not heard our latest webinar episode with Deandra Wardell, it is fantastic. She gave lots of examples of how she's been using process improvement and to operationalize diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility efforts systemically, which is really, really powerful, really great, and just practical. Really great to hear how she is doing that. So that's a fantastic episode. She's always a wonderful presenter. So I will give you guys a link to that in the chat before too long. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop sharing. I think sharing is a good thing, but I'm going to let you share.
Awesome. Thank you. And given the shift to Q&A, if you could help me moderate as those come in, that would be very helpful.
I will
Elizabeth.
absolutely look at the Q&A.
Awesome. And let me just pull up my screen and get everything settled. Okay, so we can, that was supposed to be hidden. So we can jump right in. I believe, Elizabeth, you have a poll set up for us.
I do. I'm going to launch a poll.
We'd like to ask the group, so what percentage of your work that you're in on a day-to-day basis are you participating as part of a team? If you could go ahead, we'll give you about 20 seconds to select your answer.
Yeah, I like this, the idea of this thinking through. How much am I working solo and how much am I part of a group in the work that I do?
And even when you are working solo, sometimes it's for a team, right? It might be your individual activity that goes back to a team. So count all of that as teamwork. And then what are you not part of your team? And you can go ahead, Elizabeth, and close that. And so it looks like a heavy percentage of us, 75 to 100% of our time, we're with a team. And, a little bit less for about 25% have landed in the 50 to 75. So teaming is a big part of our world, day in, day out, right? And our workplace world these days. So go ahead with the next poll question. I'd like you to think about your current team. And if you were going to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, go ahead and pull that poll up. A scale of 1 to 10, would you say that yours is closer to a 10? Like you're just off the charts. Awesome. You get everything done as planned. You have a blast doing it. Would you say kind of somewhere in between, like, yeah, it's okay. I don't love it. I don't hate it, but we accomplish some goals. Sometimes we're late, or a 1, pretty terrible. I can't stand this team. And I guess I intended for there to be some other numbers in between there, but I apologize for not spelling those out. Go ahead and select what is closest to how you feel about your current work and project team.
Yeah, no, it's a good question.
And it disappeared for me. Did you close the poll?
I didn't mean to. I think somehow it jumped the gun.
Okay. Well, we've got about half stellar and about half of the responses. We still got about 25 responses in there. Yeah, about 20 responses. That's decent. Okay, good. So I'm glad that there's no one on this call today so far that feels like their team is terrible and they can't stand their team. So that's good news. So let us jump into, here's where I'd like you to chat into the Q&A area. How would you describe some of your best team experiences? And then I'm going to ask you also to follow that up in a minute with the opposite as well. So what are some of your best team experiences that you've had? Describe those for us.
I'm watching chat, so I'm watching Q&A. So you guys work with us on the whole disabled
Q&A.
chat and just put your experiences into Q&A and I will read them back out. And okay, so Heather said clear direction and shared goals. And Carlos said building relationships, growing our employees.
Great.
And let's see. Do those resonate for you? Oh, here's another one.
They sure
Alignment
do.
in how to meet goals, willing to share knowledge. That's Alejandro.
There's
Alignment,
a
how to
lot
meet
popping
goals.
in here now.
Olga said team capacity. Amy says when all members were aligned, energized, and having fun. Arthur said communication and creativity. Emily says having the team be able to decipher their own goals rather than having targets or goals handed to them. All hands on deck. Katie says shared understanding of the work to be done, clear roles and responsibilities. Everyone can ask a question and learn from others. Philippe said, my best includes high trust built on shared experiences and workshops focused on problem solving to conditions of satisfaction, collaboration on problem solving. Angela said, transparency, collaboration, deep conversations and alignment and goal setting, practical approach to achievement. And Sarah says, high degree of awareness of team members' emotional states. Also, everyone on average speaks, contributes the same amount.
Yeah, so there's a lot of good comments in here, and I'll share with you one of my favorite stories was a team that, and Elizabeth mentioned, I spent a lot of my time in the design and construction industry, and our project team was wrapping up, and we were doing our final lessons learned or retrospective, and there was this gentleman, Sam, big guy, really, really big guy. He had a big cowboy hat and cowboy boots and a big, huge truck that he drove around. And we're going around the table and we're talking about some things, and tears start coming down his face, like just slowly slipping out. And he says, I don't want to go to another project without you guys. Like he had such a great positive experience. And that's what I've strived ever since then to really be intentional about trying to create. So now the flip side of that, how would you describe some of your worst team experiences? And for these, Elizabeth, we'll just read the first couple that popped through, but I would like everyone to contribute some of your descriptors for the worst and then read through others.
Okay, so I wanted to give you one more from Sarah. on the good one was high degree of
Right.
awareness of team members' emotional states. Also, everyone on average speaks, contributes. Oh, I
Mm.
already gave you that one. Okay, so let me go for on the downside. We have Olga, finger pointing, blame, transferring. Jake says unable to attain the results that were anticipated, low morale. Amy says political, cross purposes, and gatekeep project work, knowledge, disrespect, no engagement. Is that good? Does that resonate?
Yeah, no, that's great.
I mean, it's
You
bad.
see them all flying in. There's a lot of things on here, and I just have a couple captured. You guys have hit a bunch of them right on the head. People going in different directions, right? Or how about this image where you've got some people working really hard to pull the team forward, and some people just kind of like along for the ride, and other people actively working against the team to sink the ship, right? Or fighting and arguing, or pointing the finger. And I think Olga said that earlier. And siloed thinking. I'm reading from the Q&A, right? So there's a lot of things that can contribute or that don't feel good about having a team that's not great. And what's interesting is maybe not so coincidentally, those teams that have good experiences together often have more efficient and better results as they're developing their teamwork too. So many of you are probably familiar with Tuckman's team development model, where on the up and down axis is effectiveness of the team, and then on the horizontal is performance of the team. And he talks about every team goes through these 4 stages, right? Where the team is forming when they first come together. And that's really where they're acquainting themselves with each other and they're establishing their ground rules and getting started. Then the next phase is storming, where members start to really communicate with each other, but they're still viewing themselves as individuals rather than teammates, right? And then there can be a lot of unrest during this time while people are trying to figure things out. And then the next phase is norming, where they really start to come together as a team and recognize that each other's viewpoints are critical and important and contribute to their end results. And then they hit this level of performance. Now, there's actually been a 5th stage added to this too, which is adjourning, which is when the team reflects on their past and they move forward and they leave their teams and go on to the next one. So when I take a look at this, what we're here to talk about today is how can we shorten this cycle and go from forming to performing more quickly and more effectively, so that we can, frankly, have a more enjoyable team experience and get more bang for our buck out of our team. And in my perspective, that takes doing some intentional team building with your project team, ideally at the start of your project. And this is something that I view as an event, a very specific event. Now, whether this event is a 2-day event or a 20-minute event really depends on the size and the scope of the project that you're working on together. So some of the sample agenda items that you might want to consider, almost always you'll want to do an update and overview of the project and the client, right? What is it that we're trying to achieve here? Something else that you might want to include is getting to know each other, the team members knowing each other. Now, the ones on the topics that I have on this slide that are green and italicized, we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive in the presentation. The other ones I'm not going to dive into for the sake of this webinar. Some kind of a team building exercise. So there's a whole bunch of books out there, even virtual team building exercises, where you might want to bring your team together. For me, in this piece here, one of the things that I really look for is an exercise that will help the team recognize that they are all in this together and they can't be successful without each other. So it's literally impossible on a good team for one person to be successful, but the other person not to, because you're all dependent on each other. Something else that I like to cover in here is a little bit of learning about teams and what makes a high performing team. Something else you might want to cover is how are we going to plan our project or do some actual planning of the project? Maybe a responsibility matrix of who is doing what and who's got what responsibilities to deliver key components of the project. Depending on what kind of a project is, you might have certain tools or systems that you're planning on using, and you want to identify and align around which ones those are for your team. Aligning on the project outcomes. And for this, it goes beyond just the scope of the project. I want to talk about with the team, what are all the team members looking to get out of this project as well? Sorry about that. How are we going to make decisions on this team? When we run into conflicts, how are we going to embrace those and resolve those? And what tactics do we want to use? And how are we going to behave as a team? So spend some time creating those team rules together. And then the social aspect of it. What kind of a outing do we want to prepare for this team? Have a dinner, go golfing, whatever. Those are all some things that I like to propose to have in an agenda for a kickoff, depending on, again, the size and the scope of your team. So I'd like you to go ahead and type into the question, the Q&A, what are some other topics that you might have seen in a project team kickoff?
I think I was able to enable chat.
Unlock the chat. Awesome. So let's shift back to chat.
See if
And if you can't chat, then put something in the Q&A. No, Tracy, that just went to host and panelist. Oh, but everyone in here. Oh, perfect. Hi, it's working. It does work. That's fantastic. So what are the other things? Group exercises. What does success look like? Exactly. What else would you maybe put in as an agenda topic? Problem solving in action. That is agility, if I've ever seen it. Oops, I am sorry to keep doing that. So what other topics might you want to include in an agenda for a team kickoff? Roles, responsibilities, right? Ground rules. Great. Potential dependencies from in-flight projects. Right? Because it's rare that people are working on just one project at a time. Brainstorming on risks, the goal, and the way you've capitalized it. I'm not sure if you're talking about the goal as in constraints or the goal as in the goal of the project, right? Both could be very applicable. The why behind the work, expectations. Awesome. Great. Lots of good stuff. So there's a lot of different topics that you might want to include. And depending on your session, you want to be intentional about what's going to be in there. Now, some that I almost always recommend including, and we're going to dive into, like I said, is getting to know each other. So when we talk about getting to know each other, one of the things that I like to break this into different categories. So personal, you want to get to know something about all the people on your team from a personal perspective. Where did they grow up? What did they like to do outside of work? Things like that. A favorite activity of mine is when you've got a group of people, a room of them, divide them up in small groups of like 4 or 5, have them find 10 things in common and have them find 5 things that are unique to each individual, and then share them back with the larger group, right? And then professional, get to know each other from a professional perspective. What's their role in the company and the project? And maybe something about their career history, how they got to where they are today. Another thing that I like to do is assessment results. Have all of the team take an assessment of sorts and then debrief them together as a room. Now, some of these you have to have a certified facilitator for. Others, like Social Style and 16 Personalities, you can just find them online and take them for free and have those conversations. For me, one of the key components in debriefing these is really getting people to be a little bit more vulnerable and opening up with each other. and driving the kind of conversations of helping people better understand how to communicate and communicate with each other. So Sarah's got a question in here about any tips on cost benefit for these things. What's gained by spending time to do? Are you talking about the overall kicking off the team or some of the assessments? You can clarify that, Sarah. And then that might be a question, depending on your answer to that we save for the end. The assessments. So Sarah, I would say the cost benefit, it really, it depends on your team, and it depends on what type of a assessment conversation you're going to have. So that, like I said, the social style and 16 personalities, it takes 20 minutes for people to do it. You can do them for free, and then you can have a 45-minute conversation. So there's not a huge cost going into it. The benefit, I think, is priceless if it's well facilitated, right? And some of the other ones that have a little bit more science and data behind them can be a little bit more helpful in that direction as well. So now, if you don't do any of those, something that I also, and I'll share this template with all of you, this is an easy thing to do that goes into that cost benefit that you're talking about, Sarah, that doesn't have much of a cost. Create a very simple template for your project team and have them fill it out themselves and have their name and their role in the project. And then from a very personal perspective, when is it that you're going to get the best of me or the worst of me? And what are the kinds of things you can count on me to do? And what do you need? What do these people need from each other in order to deliver effectively? And then something personal about each other. And then when you have the team come together, have each person spend 5 or 6 minutes explaining themselves to the rest of the team. What's nice about something like this too, is then it can become part of your onboarding package for any new team members that join your project as things move down the pike, as the team progresses. So all of this is really just about helping people kind of learn a little bit more about each other so that they can gel a little bit better and to start to build some trust and open up vulnerability. Right. So the next thing that I'll dive into is a little bit of learning about teams. And when this part here, I'll share with you, there are a couple of resources that I use for this. One of them is Patrick Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. If you haven't read this and you work on teams, I highly recommend that you get a hold of it and read it. It's a great fable story that just helps really highlight some key things and how they're applicable on teams of any kind. And some of you had called out some of these earlier when we were talking about what makes a good team and some of the worst teams you've been on. And in this book, Patrick talks about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And the foundation, the first dysfunction of all of these is the absence of trust. And this is really where team members have a fear of being vulnerable with each other, and it prevents them from building trust amongst the team. So going back to that getting to know each other piece, that can help start to tap into that and start to build the trust while at the same time just really getting to know each other. Fear of conflict is the next dysfunction that he talks about. And that is when you see a lot of artificial harmony. And I'm sure most of you have been in a situation where people in a room together agree on something and then they leave the room. And then there's the meeting after the meeting where people are questioning what just got decided because we're afraid to have that healthy conflict to resolve those conversations and in a direction that everyone feels like they're a valuable part of. Lack of commitment and that's where that lack of clarity actually prevents buy-in. Artificial harmony, great description from Olga. Thank you. That's actually, I think, how Patrick describes it in the book too. we just kind of float along pretending that we're all getting along and agreeing and committed to those same things together. And then avoidance of accountability, right? That when you don't have conflict and you don't have team commitment, it's really hard to then hold yourselves or each other accountable. And we try to avoid accountability and we don't pay attention to the results that we're trying to achieve together. So and your project team might look something like this, right? So let's take those dysfunctions on a project team and let's turn them into functions. And let's, first of all, as a team, focus on results together. What results are we trying to achieve as a project team? And that can help us then hold one another more accountable. And it can help us commit to our decisions and to our actions that we make or that we take or that we say we're going to take. And which leads to us being able to engage in conflict around ideas, right? Healthy conflict is what's really going to help us drive better results. And you have to build all of those things, don't happen by themselves. They all have to be built on a foundation of trust. Without that trust, none of the rest of it will you be able to achieve. So we're going to, the one other thing I want to throw in there about trust comes from Stephen M.R. Covey's book, The Speed of Trust. Another great book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And that's very helpful, not only for project teams, but for life in general. And this is how he opens up the book. I know this is a lot to read, but I'll give you a minute to read it. My perspective, it's very powerful. And I will pull just one formula from his book, actually two, that he talks about in this book, is that when you have high trust, you will have high speed and in delivery and lower cost. And when you have a lack of trust, the inverse is true. When you have low trust, things take longer to get done and they cost more to get done, right? Because we're hedging our bets, and if something's supposed to get done and I need that in order to do my work, I'm going to build a buffer in there. And it just takes longer to get projects delivered because we don't have that trust. And then there's one more source that I like to learn from when it comes to teams, and that's from Google. And I don't just mean going to Google and learning about how to build a team, but I mean going to Google and the study that they did back in the year 2012. It was called Project Aristotle. And they had noticed that some of their teams delivered phenomenal results, some of them not so much. And their assumption initially going into this study was that if you take a bunch of A players and put them together, you'll get really great results on your project teams. And when they went through and studied a bunch of their teams and a bunch of the characteristics and things that made their teams effective that contributed to it, what they learned is actually who is on the team matters much less than how those team members actually interact, how they structure their work, and how they view their contributions to their work. So they have identified within their study the 5 key contributors that lead to a higher performing team. And so at the fifth one, the fifth most important, is impact. And team members have to think and feel that their work matters and creates change. Then the fourth thing is the work is personally important to those team members. So we're going to go through all these, but we'll kind of tie back into them in a little bit and how we can apply them to our project settings. So then the third thing is that there's structure and clarity, and team members really understand their roles, the roles of each other, the plans of the team, the goals of the team. So some of those things that you said again at the beginning of this about a good team and not so great teams, having that structure and clarity is helpful. Dependability. Team members get things done on time and they meet Google's high bar for excellence. Now, before we go into the first most important thing from their project, I want to pause on dependability and then go back to Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, or the 5 functions. We talk about accountability and committing to decisions and action. And so all of these things have a couple of things in common around dependability and reliability. So I'd like you to go ahead in the chat box and just share some thoughts that you've noticed about dependability and reliability on project teams. And I'd like to speak kind of in generalizations here. What have you seen? It's contagious both ways. Absolutely. It'll make or break success. It's the behaviors, it's the walking the talk that builds the trust, and it builds it on itself, right? And the more you've got people trusting each other and following through with reliability, the more it snowballs, the more it can become a better and stronger thing. It's situational based on bandwidth. And if they're the go-to people, and people who are viewed as dependable and reliable become the go-to people, and everyone wants them on their project, right? And then sometimes they wind up shouldering the workload of a bunch of people because they're the ones that, right? So it can actually be a double-edged sword. Good team, good results. Poor team, teamwork equals struggles with the project communication and reliability. Absolutely. And it's tied to trust. Less dependability makes for a slower project that's troubled. And that is, I would say, dependability. The more dependable and reliable you are, the more trust you're building, right? And that's how, because people are judging you based on the actions they see. So another thing out of the book, The Speed of Trust, is that we judge ourselves based on our intentions, but we judge other people based on their actions. So when we see people being dependable and reliable, then we see that we can trust them. So how does this impact you personally? And how does it impact our projects? And how does it impact our companies? The dependability and reliability of our projects. Without it, project velocity slows down. Absolutely, for sure. I'd say from a personal level, it can impact the stress that people are carrying, right? If your team is reliable and dependable, you're going to have a lower stress level than if your team is not, right? It can impact your satisfaction at your job, at your project. And it can impact your project itself by the level of quality, right? That you might get a higher level of quality if there's real dependability and reliability. Creativity and motivation suffer if trust and relationships are lacking. There's no consistency in performance, then there's no way to estimate your effort, which can lead to really poor planning. As a facilitator, I spend way too much time babysitting those unreliables. I could be spending that effort somewhere else. Absolutely. I hear you, Emily. Rate of adoption and sustainment, change management, and the value of change. People stop volunteering, right, for project work because it's so painful. And higher efficiency and creativity and productivity with those project teams, and the reliable ones, right? So it impacts through and through. So I'd like you now to grab a pen and a piece of paper. Pencil, paper, can be a pen too, it doesn't have to be. And then I'd like to ask you to draw me a house. I'm just going to give you 20 seconds. I'll ask you to draw me a house. And Elizabeth, since you're on camera, when you're done, would you mind holding your house up to the camera? Let me take a peek.
Well, It's in blue pen. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see it, but let's see if I can get you.
Oh, I can see it.
Got a
That's a
little
nice
bit there.
house. That's a nice house. I'm curious how everyone else is compared. This is really what I was expecting. I was hoping you would all draw me this. So go ahead, type into the chat box if this is what you drew me. I specifically really wanted to have the 2-car garage and what do you call that? With a little patio out front, but I didn't. My replica of Elizabeth's. Well, okay. So what happened here? So I'm going to way oversimplify how we can actually focus on increasing project dependability and reliability. And that is through this diagram called Conversations for Action by Fernando Flores, who is, he does a lot of work in linguistics and language as action and theory around that. And what he really talks about is that most of the work we do is a result of a commitment we make from one person to another. And we'll call those one person to another the performer of the work and the customer of the work. So in that example, I was the customer saying, I'd like you to draw me a house. And you were all the performers drawing me a house. And most of your work, you can kind of pull it back to someone needs it from you, then they are your customer. And there are some steps that we can pay a little bit more attention to help increase reliability. And the first step is preparing for the customer to go ahead and prepare the request and make the request. And then the performer accepts that request after some negotiation, right? And maybe they can accept the request as is, maybe they can't. But one of the things that we want to negotiate around are the time that we're going to have to deliver that request and what we call the conditions of satisfaction. So what does the end result that the customer is looking for actually look like? And spending a few minutes to negotiate through these things and make sure both parties understand them can be really invaluable to being able to then complete that delivery on time or as promised. And sometimes you might have to clarify because you might have different understandings of what those conditions of satisfaction are. Sometimes you might need to go get another promise from somebody else. Like I need to go get a pencil from somebody so I can draw my house. Then we want to complete this loop, the performer, once they've completed that work, needs to go ahead and report that they're done. And then ideally the customer says, hey, yes, thank you. This meets my expectation. So all of these pieces are components to building reliability on our projects. And oftentimes when I'm on a project, I don't know about you, but I hear things like, well, yeah, sure, maybe I can do that. Or I'm shooting for Wednesday, or I hope to get it done, or I could do it, or sure, I'll try to. And these are all pretty unreliable. If you go back to that chart, these aren't the words that make reliable promises. Some more reliable terms could be I will do, or yes, I will do if Elizabeth gives me the pencil I need, or if something else, we call that a contingent promise. Or no, I can't do it. And this one scares people a lot, being able to listen and hear the word no. But the reality is no doesn't mean they're not going to do it. No just means now we have to negotiate. Is there something else that you can deliver that will help me advance my work? Or is there something else on your plate that we need to take off your plate? Or do I need to find someone else to do it? So no is really an invite to a deeper conversation. It's not an end to that conversation. Yes, I promise to, or hey, I will commit to doing that after I check my calendar this afternoon. I need to make sure I have time to do it. So we can focus our teams on shifting to that more reliable language. And I often do that by actually walking through that chart we just talked about together and showing them and using real examples from the project team of how really a project is a promise made up of commitments from all these people from one to another. So, and then ideally we shift from a team where you have to hold each other accountable to really a culture where we want to be accountable ourselves, right? It makes it easier. So then take all of that and pull it back into Project Aristotle, right? And I think that's a big piece of how we get that dependability on our projects. And then the number one most important thing, which I'm guessing plenty of you have heard of this term before, psychological safety. It is the most important thing driving towards a team that will deliver good results, a high-performing team, right? That's where team members feel safe to take risks and be vulnerable in front of each other. So Amy Edmondson, who's done a ton of research on this and kind of the one who coined the phrase, this is how she defines it, right? It's a belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with new ideas or questions or concerns or making mistakes. So what this looks like, a psychologically safe environment. People on the team are happy to bring up problems or tough issues. They're not worried about getting in trouble for it. They want to bring them up. It's safe to take a risk on the team. Team members won't deliberately undermine each other's work, and team members recognize and value each other's skills and abilities. And then maybe not so much psychologically safe is when mistakes are made, they're held against people. Or people sometimes reject each other's ideas just based on their backgrounds and differences of opinion. Or when it's difficult to ask people for help, right? Which is an awful spot to be in, where you really feel like you need help, but you don't feel like you can go to anyone on your team for it. Or people are afraid to bring up a new or a half-baked idea. And someone earlier in the comments, I forget which one it was, but had talked about politics on a project, and if company politics are at play, how that can actually be problematic for the results of the team. So pulling this all back together, we've got Project Aristotle results that we've just talked about. We've got Patrick Lencioni. We've got the speed of trust. Now, what do we want to do with those things? So I take those two different sets of things and let's create our project outcomes and our team rules. Now, when I'm talking about project outcomes, there absolutely are very specific things for the project itself that we need to make sure we're achieving, right? Whether it's we need to figure out how to get X number of widgets each day at the end of this project, or whether if it's a process improvement project, or if we're designing and building a construction building, it needs to be done by January 1st, and we need to have it done for this amount of budget. So that's part of it. But usually that's something we know when we come onto a project team, right? So there are some other results that I like to blend into here. And I tie it back to creating work that's personally important to people and people feeling like their work matters in addition to that. And if you go to the other Stephen Covey and you talk about beginning with the end in mind, defining as a team, what does that really look like when we're all done this project? Not only have we met our schedule and our budget, but what does it mean for our team together? And maybe it means that we all want to work on another team again together, right? Maybe it means that I personally have stayed within my amount of budgeted hours or what I planned for this. Now, the process that I tend to go about doing this and coming up with these as a team is I break the group up into small groups and have them brainstorm ideas. Then we have the small groups report out to the big group. And then as a big group, we prioritize and discuss through which ones do we want to select. And then we pick 5 or 6 that we want as our outcomes in addition to the actual project scope. Then we wordsmith them and finalize them. Caution point, you want to have a process for tracking these, right? And utilizing them along the way. So not just come up with them and then revisit them at the end of the project, but so that as you're making decisions on the project, you're bouncing them across these project outcomes and how are they going to help us advance towards these things. So that's the process that I tend to use the most often when I have a larger project team for creating project outcomes. Now, creating team rules, I will then go back to that team and say, oftentimes we let our project dictate our culture. We now have the opportunity to be intentional about our culture and let that impact our project, right? Mm-hmm. So remembering the things that we talked about, like speed of trust and Patrick Lencioni's functions, 5 functions of a team and behaviors, and the things from Project Aristotle that we've learned. What do we want our project culture to feel like? What kind of rules do we want to set ourselves up to go ahead and behave on in order to achieve that culture and the things that we know we're trying to achieve? So then, does this look familiar? Because these are the same 3 steps that we used for creating the project outcomes. I use the same steps for this, except obviously select as many team rules as we need to. And some of these examples might be, we will start all of our meetings on time. We will be reliable in the commitments that we make to each other. We will measure the commitments that we make to each other. And then again, have a process for tracking and utilization. So for every single rule we have, how are we going to measure and make sure that we're following these rules so that we know when we're starting to fall off track, we know we have an opportunity to pay attention to as a project team. So those are a couple of the key things that I include with a team building event. And so now that we've got that all kind of, and you guys gave a bunch of great additional topics that I would, that are really, I hope y'all wrote some of those down too, because I think they're fantastic. When it comes to setting up an event, what are the things that we need to do? So a couple of key points that I look for with setting up an event is identify who the sponsor is of your event. And this can be an executive in the organization. It could be just a higher level person, or it could be the highest level person that owns the project, right? And they're the ones who are going to not only send the invitation to everybody to come join us, but they're going to do the kickoff at the beginning of the teaming event. Talk to some of those key team members and see what they would like to get out of this kickoff. And then customize the agenda, create, if you're using a presentation or handouts, create all the materials you'll need and send the invitation. And then some logistic things, right? Where are you going to have it? Room setup. I personally prefer round tables where it's easy to break people up into smaller groups. But obviously, depending on what your situation is. What materials do you need? I don't go anywhere without sticky notes. I'm guessing a lot of you are the same, right? You need whiteboards and flip charts and having your little checklist. And then food. If it's going to be longer than an hour or two, make sure you're feeding people and have coffee for them and that kind of thing. And then leading an event, I'm not going to give you a ton of information on this because a whole nother webinar could be done on good facilitation. But one thing I would say is that you want to have someone who is independent from the team actually facilitating the event. And the reason for that is because your brain cannot physically be in facilitation mode and participation mode at the same time. So if you try to facilitate and participate, it means you're task switching, which I would imagine most people in this group understand how much stress and waste that actually creates in your end results. And then here are some great tips for being a strong facilitator. So it doesn't mean you need to go hire someone externally to come do it. It means go pull someone else from your company who's got facilitative skills to come facilitate your teaming and your kickoff. So I'm guessing most of the people on this call are already on a project team and not at a point where we're going to start a new one up tomorrow and we can go create a whole new event. So what are some of the things you could do today or tomorrow, depending on what time it is? So you can have icebreakers in your meetings. You can start with those, just quick what is your best part of your summer so far? Quick little things that start to tap into people getting to know each other better. You can hold a getting to know each other meeting. You can take that slide that I put up, and you can make it your own and have everyone do one and present to each other. You can talk about the Tuckman model and identify where your team currently is and have a conversation around it. You could share Google's Project Oxygen with your team. You can talk about the 5 dysfunctions of a team from Lencioni. There's an online assessment you could take, and you could have your entire team take and talk through your results together and identify your opportunities for improving. You could teach your team about reliable promises from that language action workflow loop that I shared. You can take individual assessments of some sort and share them and discuss your results together. Or, and this one might be the most fun, right? Just arrange a meal or a fun activity together to go just spend a little bit more personal time together. So we're kind of wrapping near the end. I know we've covered a ton. And Elizabeth, if you could kindly pull up the last question. Did you learn something new today that you'll be applying in the future? This is kind of my little plan, do, check, act. Sorry, Elizabeth.
I have a suspicion of what the poll is going to show.
I hope.
I know personally what I would put into the poll, but I'm not allowed to add. But let's see, you've got.
Yeah, it won't let me either.
Okay.
So we'll give everyone like 3 more seconds, and you can go ahead and close that one out.
Here we go, and let me share.
Yay! So only 15 people answered, and I know we have a few more than that. So I'm hoping that the rest of you were just like away from your computer or something like that. I want to toss it over. We do have like 3 minutes left. If there are any questions that we can answer out there, would love to take those on.
Yeah, let us know if you have more, although I have to say, such an incredibly thorough job, Rebecca. You really touched on all of the aspects here. So this was a real tour de force and just really comprehensive sense of what goes into being mindful, about creating a great team. So I'm loving that this is now a resource. And just so you guys know, the recording of this webinar will go up on our website. They usually go the Monday after the webinar. And so you can access the wisdom of Rebecca whenever the spirit moves you, or if you're suddenly find yourself about to form a team. Here's one for you from Philippe.
Felipe, what is a common team improvement challenge across design phase projects? So Felipe, I'm not sure I quite understand the wording of your question. What is a challenge that you commonly run into on design phase projects? Is that what you're saying?
Like
when working on projects and design. So a common challenge for teaming. Honestly, Felipe, I think when I'm on the design phase of projects, one of the things that I see most often, first of all, establishing that foundational trust and getting people from different, but then helping people learn to expose assumptions in their minds that they're carrying, right? We all come to the table with tremendous background and history and experience that impacts how we think about things. And we don't necessarily connect why we think a certain way with how we're thinking about it. And it can create an awful lot of misinterpretation between people. And then especially when you're talking about design projects, in my world, a lot of times that's architects and engineers, but pulling in contractors who oftentimes speak different languages to begin with. So helping uncover those assumptions and helping people really learn to articulate in a different way. Mm. And I hope that helps. Okay, good. That does answer your question. Good.
Beautifully.
Thank you very much, Felipe. Any other questions? then I'd like to thank you all very much for your attention and your engagement. Phenomenal engagement. Very impressed. And I'll turn it back to you, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Yeah, back to the engagement. Thank you guys for going with the flow in terms of dealing with our issues around the chat. Turns out I had the option all along. I just didn't know about it. But thanks so much to you, Rebecca. That was fabulous, as I said. And I never gave you guys the link. If you want to go hear the latest podcast, there it is. We also have a podcast with Rebecca, if you'd like to access that, which is back to kind of lean in construction for those of you involved in that arena. But thanks, everybody. I hope to see you next month at the cafe with the Denver Peak Academy. And come back anytime. Rebecca, was awesome to have you. Bye,
Thank you
guys.
very much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.